I borrowed $127,000 to pay for my graduate education, and that number horrifies most people, but I'm okay with it because I had a plan for the money and an understanding of what it would mean for me before I took it out. There's a lot of information out there saying that student debt is bad and to avoid student debt at all costs. And I do think you should do everything in your power to minimize how much debt you take. But if you're smart about it, student debt can be a way to leverage your education to make more money. And that's what I did. In this video, I'm gonna explain my thought process, how I calculated what I needed for school, what I could afford for school, and what I actually borrowed for school. And of course, give you some tips for figuring it out for yourself. As always, my content is not financial advice, but rather a jumping off point for you to continue your own financial education and make smart decisions for yourself. While it can absolutely feel overwhelming, we're gonna try to make it as simple as possible. And we'll start by figuring out how much you actually need to borrow for school. So first of all, I needed to know the total cost of my education and how much I would potentially need to cover with loans. First, start with the total cost. Figure out the total price tag for your education. This was my total investment. Then go ahead and subtract anything that is free money. I had a small scholarship for grad school, but nothing else. You'll subtract this amount from your total investment, and this is your remaining cost. Finally, you're gonna subtract any contributions that you can make. One big thing that I was able to add in was that I would be able to work through grad school. This was hard, but I also saw how it saved me tens of thousands of dollars over the cost of my education. My goal was to pay for my cost of living, which I kept incredibly low. So I removed what I was gonna be able to contribute to my education from my remaining cost. You might have contributions from family members or a 529 account, your own savings, or your own ability to work as well. After you remove any realistic contributions, you're left with what is the gap. This is the maximum amount that you should consider taking a loan for. So now I knew the maximum amount that I would need to cover, but what could I actually afford to pay back? When it comes to loans and paying them back, there are a few things that you need to know. The first is that you'll pay interest on the money you take out, so it costs money to borrow this money. There's also no set repayment plan for federal loans. There are different options, some of which won't even cover the interest every single month depending on your income, like an income-driven plan. This is how people get into situations where they've paid on their loans for an extended period of time, but the balance has grown. There are very few situations where this makes sense. One of them is if you're counting on public student loan forgiveness, and doing this is risky and means that you lose a lot of freedom in where you work. I don't think it's wise to borrow money and rely on forgiveness. My perspective is that student loans should be a tool that allow you to earn more money and therefore should be treated like every other debt where you expect to pay them off. To be clear, I think that public student loan forgiveness is a wonderful program and it is one that is absolutely beneficial. People that spend 10 years working in a public nonprofit field absolutely have done their due diligence for society and deserve to have their student loans forgiven. But taking out excessive loans and relying on forgiveness to pay them back is dangerous because that program might not exist by the time you're paying off your loans. You might have to move for other life reasons or leave the workforce for other life reasons, and then you might be stuck paying off a debt that you did not consider having to pay back. So in this video, we're going to talk about a pretty reasonable timeline, which is 10 years. But calculating how much you can afford specifically with student loans is unique because you don't necessarily know what your income is going to be at the start of those 10 years. So we'll have to figure that out first. Now this is step 2, and we'll call it estimating our future earnings. This is the step where I projected what my income would be after graduation. Now I was getting a professional degree for a very specific job, so this was very easy for me. If you're headed into undergrad, then it's important to understand that your path might change, but borrowing money limits your freedom to change your mind. It's true, the job you think you might want isn't necessarily the job you'll end up with. And ultimately, higher education is not necessarily career training, but it is realistic to expect that you will get a job in the field in which you study. If you are borrowing money for school, you are taking on a responsibility. When you have responsibilities, you lose some freedoms. One of those freedoms might be changing your mind. You can't go into school and expect to borrow $60,000 because you're going to get a degree in business and will be able to make that money, change your mind in school, become a museum curator, and make $30,000. If you want more freedom, then you cannot afford to borrow as much money or any money for school. So now that you have a major and you're committed to it, start by researching that major. Using reliable sites like the US Bureau of Labor Statistics or industry salary guides, look up the typical starting salary for your chosen field in a location where you plan to live. Then use the golden rule, the 1-to-1 ratio. A smart and conservative rule of thumb is to keep your student loan debt less than or equal to your starting salary. If your total debt is going to be $60,000 and your expected starting salary is $70,000, that's great. If your debt is $120,000 and your starting salary is $50,000, this is a dangerous place. Now, real quick, if your gap from step 1 is higher than your expected starting salary, it would be smart to go back and lower your cost. Maybe consider a state school, applying to scholarships, or going to community college for the first 2 years. Step 3 is going to be calculate a potential monthly payment. This is going to be the real world affordability test. Let me first teach you how to calculate what is comfortable. We're going to estimate our monthly payment. For every $10,000 you borrow, your monthly payment will roughly be $100 on a standard 10-year repayment plan, assuming a typical interest rate of less than 9%. So for example, if you borrow $50,000, your estimated monthly payment is $500. Next, you're gonna apply the 10% rule. Financial experts recommend that your monthly payment not exceed 10% of your total pay. So if your estimated salary is $70,000 divided by 12 months, that's $5,833. 10% of $5,833 is $583, which is the maximum amount you'd be able to afford each month. Now we're gonna do the affordability check. If your estimated payment is less than your maximum affordable payment, you're in a good spot. If your estimated payment is more than 10%, it's gonna be very hard to afford rent, food, utilities, and have any fun money left over, much less build wealth for the future. This might sound like a faraway thing that is not relevant, but you really need to consider what you want from life. And the last thing to consider is paying off your debt faster. The lower your monthly payment is, the more money you'll be able to put towards your debt to get rid of that monthly payment altogether. Now, as you can tell by my numbers, I overshot the 10% rule, and this was both a risk and a sacrifice. I calculated that it would take me about 6 years to save up for school and pay for that cost. Again, I had already graduated with my undergrad debt-free, and this was a huge privilege because it allowed me to run the numbers the way that I did. The difference in my potential income with the graduate degree was enough that I would be able to pay off my loans in less than the amount of time that it would take me to save up for school and invest alongside it. And that was, of course, if I kept my cost of living relatively the same. I had to look at the context of my life at the time. I was 22, I would be graduating at 25. At the time, I was living with roommates for about $1,000 a month in Denver. I figured I would be comfortable to either continue doing this after graduate school or move in with my parents, who were very supportive of me and would have allowed me to do that. This is a privilege. I was also borrowing for a terminal degree that would basically guarantee me work. So I saw multiple paths forward that I was willing to take in order to aggressively pay off my debt, and knew that I would be able to afford to do so if I kept my cost of living low. But let's say you're going into undergrad at a traditional age. You're young, you're 17, you're 18. The next 4 years are blurry. Your fallbacks are less clear and less stable, and the last thing you want is to overextend yourself and put yourself in a financial burden for the rest of your life. I would opt for a more conservative approach. No matter what, no matter how much you planned or how prepared you are, the less debt you have, the lighter you will feel and the easier it will be to live life. These decisions are big because this is adulthood. Simply put, debt should be used to cover the minimum gap, not fund luxury experiences. This is a good rule to take with you in life in general. Choosing a more expensive school when there are less expensive ones available because you want a certain experience is funding a luxury experience with debt. You may have to choose between going to your dream school with your friends and having this out-of-the-world experience and going to a cheaper state school. This is a hard choice, but making the responsible choice now will likely mean you'll have more money in your true adulthood to connect with your friends and have those experiences later on. Every calculation here is hypothetical because you cannot guarantee the outcome. And taking out loans without a guarantee is a risk. Student debt can be beneficial to opening doors if used appropriately, but it can also be a suffocating weight. And when it comes to finances, we each have our own risk tolerance, but we can't begin to understand that without running the proper calculations first. I hope this video helps you start to understand what you can afford for school and run your own calculations and empower you to make a choice that best supports that. Your loan should provide you opportunity, not burden you. If you're interested in sticking around for my journey to pay off my student loan debt and see what else I do with my money now that I am an adult out in the world, go ahead and follow along. And most importantly, good luck.